Our organs consist of cells and tissue that develop from three germ layers: the inner, the middle, and the outer germ layer. Dr. Hamer has discovered that microbes only become active during the healing phase, acting as symbiotic helpers on the tissue types assigned to them in the history of development. The infection theory would therefore be wrong, and the microbes would not be the cause of the disease. This naturally makes you wonder what infectious diseases are all about. Only one can be true. Either there is contagion or there is not. I would like to try to illustrate the topic as simple as possible using the different clinical pictures of the lungs. Anatomically, we have the alveoli in the lungs, which develop from the inner germ layer, yellow group, and the lower airways, the bronchi, which develop from the outer germ layer, red group. The function of the alveoli is gas exchange, that of the lower airways is air conduction. Figuratively speaking, you could say that the bronchi are roads through which the air is transported, and the alveoli are the factories in which work is carried out. This distribution of tasks can be applied analogously to many other organs. Milk is produced in the mammary gland tissue and released via the milk ducts. Digestive enzymes are produced in the pancreatic tissue and released via the bile ducts. In the renal collecting ducts, urine is collected and channeled towards the urinary tract for release, etc., etc. There's a systematic order that has developed from the layers. It should be noted that the lung has tissue types from the inner and outer germ layers, and thus has two different conflict contents with two different significant biological special programs, SBS for short. The conflict content of the alveoli is the fear of death, see video George Harrison. The DHS is the fear of death for oneself or someone else. In the active phase, round lung foci grow, known in conventional medicine as lung cancer. Cell division is also the biological meaning of the program. Mother Nature wants to help the individual to be able to take in more air in the death throes, i.e., to simplify more vesicles, more oxygen. If the conflict is resolved, the corresponding microbes, the TBC bacteria, become active and clear away the previously grown cells. You get hemoptysis, a highly contagious pulmonary TBC in conventional medicine. At the end of the healing phase, the tumor is broken down and a cavity remains in the affected areas. And now think about it. All this highly contaminated, bloody, foamy TBC sputum makes its way out from the alveoli via the tissue of the outer germ layer, i.e., the bronchial mucosa, laryngeal mucosa, mouth and throat. The TBC sputum leaves this tissue completely alone. Also, it has direct contact with it. Have you ever heard of bronchial TBC? It does not exist. How can that be if TBC is so destructive and dangerous? And vice versa, if I should have been infected, the TBC bacteria take the same route back, and again they only become active on the tissue of the inner germ layer. Let's play the same game with the lower airways. The conflict content of the bronchi for all men is territorial fear. Dr. Hamer writes about the DHS, "You can hear the enemy, but you can't see him yet. How should things continue in my territory in the future?" In the active phase, the bronchial mucosa is broken down. This increases the diameter of the airways, which means that the body is better supplied with more air in the battle for territory. This is also the biological meaning of the program. If the conflict is resolved, the corresponding microbes become active and rebuild the bronchial mucosa with swelling. You become vegetonic, develop a cough, and are diagnosed with a respiratory infection, e.g., bronchitis caused by a virus. And now again, the same consideration as with the pulmonary TBC. The inhaled air makes its way past the viral contaminated and rotten constrictions of the airways into the alveoli. However, the viruses carried along the way do not settle in the alveoli and break them down. They limit their activity to the bronchial mucosa. How can this be if the viruses are supposed to be so insidiously evil? Because the microbes are not at war with us. Each of us has about 1 to 2 kilograms in our body. They stick to the tissues to which they are assigned by Mother Nature. The task of the viruses is to support the reconstruction of the bronchial mucosa in the affected areas. At the end of the healing phase, it is restored. Now to the epidemics. I'll stick to the lung programs. Let's take pulmonary TBC epidemics and the coronavirus respiratory infection. When were the last pulmonary TBC epidemics in Germany? Take a look at this diagram from the Federal Statistical Office on pulmonary tuberculosis cases. They were at the end and after the end of the First and Second World War. The bombs had stopped falling, the soldiers had left the front, the fear of death was over. As a result, people entered the healing phase of their fear of death conflicts en masse. Now the previously grown round foci in the lungs were broken down by tuberculosis. People started coughing up blood, and of course you could get the impression that everyone was infected with TBC. But that's wrong. It was just that many people with the same SBS were cured at the same time, which creates the impression of an epidemic. The ambulance service has what are known as compulsory presentations for infectious patients. On behalf of the Public Health Department, patients who refuse to present themselves have to be visited and collected by the ambulance service. And what do you think such patients usually do when their doorbell rings? That's right, they don't answer it. I know from an acquaintance from the emergency services in a large city that they visited a man with open lung TBC for about 6 months but never found him. During this time, he continued to go shopping in his district, took the streetcar, etc. And why was there no pulmonary TBC epidemic in that part of town? Because nobody there was afraid of dying. Now headlines suddenly become understandable when you read that refugees have reintroduced TBC. It is the same principle as the end of the war just described. The refugee is safe and the fear is resolved with the consequence of the TBC bacteria appearing. However, if someone comes here and shows no healing reactions at all, this pretty much shows that they have not come from a war zone. Now let's go back to the other lung program and the corona respiratory infection. The acquaintance above had filmed the emergency rooms during that was sold to us as the first corona wave. They were empty. He had never experienced that in 20 years. He normally runs an average of 15 alarms in 24 hours. During this first wave, the number of call-outs had reduced massively because people were afraid of catching the disease in hospital. They simply stopped making emergency calls. The first wave was virtually not existent in real life, only on television. Then came the corona measures. Among other things, these measures caused many people to experience territorial fear. I have to close my store. How am I supposed to live in the future? Aunt Uschi is coming to visit. I hope she doesn't bring the corona pandemic into our house. My favorite daughter has forbidden me to visit her, and I don't know what kind of inhuman crap has been done to people during this time. And after resolving their territorial fear DHS, people entered the healing phase. And now, in the next waves, they actually had an increased number of respiratory infections and, of course, countless other symptoms of SBS. Yeah, and if the test was positive, it was all a corona infection. Corona was virtually self fabricated by the corona measures. Like that, the knowledge of Germanische Heilkunde can also be misused. Dr. Hamer's fourth law, like everything else in Germanische Heilkunde, is logically easy to understand. And with this knowledge, it is just a logical and understandable why lung cancer is the most common metastatic cancer in humans. The cancer diagnosis causes a fear of death which starts the alveolar SBS in the lungs described above. There are no bone cells, stomach cells, etc. that have migrated into the lungs, but there is independent SBS going on. It's all that easy to understand, and you don't need to have studied chemistry, medicine, microbiology, or anything else. But if people still don't want to know anything about it, for whatever reason, then they will still run their mouths and be scared 1,000 years from now because of fundamental misconceptions about diabolical infection, microbe, and vaccination. People are usually only afraid of what they don't know. But if you discover the name Rumpelstiltskin, the terror is usually over. Yes, and Dr. Hamer has succeeded in doing just that. He has disproved the infection theory and thus cleared the way for a fear free future. It almost sounds like a fairy tale, but sometimes fairy tales come true.